Most people operate under a massive, and I mean a massive illusion, because we look at a place like Switzerland, say, not too far from where I am. It's famous for its vaults, its neutrality and Rolex watches, and its banking secrecies. And we assume that digital data stored there enjoys the same protection as, say, gold bars in a bunker. But here's the uncomfortable reality in all this is that global regulators are just starting to actually whisper about, in the age of cloud computing, physical borders are becoming absolutely irrelevant. Just say if a Swiss bank, a hospital, or a government agency stores its data on a standard cloud provider, say Azure or Amazon Web Services, even if that server is physically sitting in Zurich, foreign governments can legally seize that data when they want. And it's basically a backdoor that renders national sovereignty almost meaningless in all this. But we are witnessing a pivot as we speak, a forensic look at recent documentation regarding the Swiss legal framework. And it suggests a shift is underway, and a massive one. We are moving away from the era of, say, speculative digital assets and entering a fundamental era of computational sovereignty. This isn't about tokens, ERC20 tokens. It's about nation state building a digital iron dome to protect its independence. And by the end of this analysis, you will understand why the next great battle isn't about price action. It's about who actually holds the keys to the underlying infrastructure of the future. We need to set the stage, okay, and set it properly, because what we're analyzing here is an actual fundamental disconnect between, say, how technology was sold to us and how it actually works. Because for the last decade, okay, the conversation was always around blockchain has been dominated by, say, noise trading, speculation, and obviously price volatility. It's been a casino, to put it frank. But while the noise was loud, the signal was quietly shifting in the background. And today we are looking at what really is going to paint a picture of a sovereign cloud. And this is a concept that goes far beyond, say, the typical decentralization buzzwords that we hear thrown around, which are misused. Because this is about legal jurisdiction. It's about a specific geopolitical problem that the Swiss Confederation faces, and a specific technological solution that has been engineered to actually solve it. The narrative has shifted from, can this technology make money, to, can this technology actually protect a nation's laws? And when you say strip away the hype, you actually realize that Switzerland is currently facing a massive crisis of reliance, okay? They are a neutral nation. They have always been, but their digital underlying infrastructure is largely rented from American tech giants. Just put it blunt. And this creates a vulnerability that simply cannot exist for a country that prides its actual self on neutrality. The solution emerging is a dedicated sovereign infrastructure, a Swiss subnet that effectively creates a digital border that matches the physical one, where all the nodes are located in the Swiss jurisdiction. And this matters because if this model, say, works in Switzerland, it actually becomes the blueprint for every other sovereign nation on the earth. And we are just looking at, say, a tech upgrade here. We are looking at the potential birth of the first true digital nation state. And to understand the magnitude of this, okay, we have to look at the problem through the actual lens of, say, institutional risk, okay? Let's look at it, say, through the geopolitical problem and the Cloud Act trap. And let's get into the actual mechanics of the underlying problem here, okay? Switzerland, okay. Switzerland's brand is trust, okay, for centuries, okay. If you say, for example, wanted something kept safe, whether it was money, art, jewelry, secrets, you took it to Switzerland, okay? Their legal framework is designed to tell the rest of the world to back off. It's an anonymous haven. However, the modern world, it runs on the cloud. And that cloud is dominated by 3 or say 4 massive US-based corporations. And here is the issue in all this. The United States, they passed something called the Cloud Act. And to put it in simple terms here, this law allows US federal law enforcement to compel American tech companies to hand over data regardless of where that data is physically stored. So imagine, okay, you're a Swiss bank, okay? You store your client data on a server in Geneva, okay? You feel safe, okay? But that server is owned by a US company. Could be Google, Amazon. And under that Cloud Act, the US government can just simply bypass Swiss courts entirely, okay? And demand that data directly from the parent company in America. And I can tell you from my time observing traditional financial markets and working industry, I learned that the biggest risks are never, and I mean never the ones you see on a price chart, but the biggest risks are counterparty risks. Okay? They're massive. We're talking jurisdictional risks. And I can recall a situation years ago, okay, involving a cross-border merger. I'm not going to go into the details, but everyone was focused on the valuation and the revenue splits. But the deal, in part, almost fell apart because of one sentence in the contract, regarding which court system would handle disputes. I can recall, yes. Okay, the lawyers didn't care about the profit margin, of course, but they cared about who had the actual power to freeze the assets. And in the institutional world, okay, possession is 9/10 of the law, but jurisdiction is everything, okay? Because if you don't control the legal framework governing your actual data, you don't actually own the data, okay? You're just renting it. It's simple. And Switzerland is currently renting its digital sovereignty. And for a country that hosts the Red Cross, the beasts, and trillions in private global wealth, that vulnerability is unacceptable. And this is the burning platform, that is driving the adoption of a new infrastructure. It's not a desire, say, for innovation. It's a necessity, okay, for actual security. And the solution here is the Swiss subnet architecture. And this is where the actual decentralized sovereign cloud thesis comes into play because, okay, this indicates a move towards execution environments operated under actual Swiss authority. And this is specific, and I mean specific technical configuration, often referred to as subnet. Unlike, say, a standard blockchain, where data is replicated across thousands of random computers globally, from a basement in Ohio to a data center in Singapore, a sovereign subnet is geographically fenced. Okay? These are 3 components to this that make it legally compliant, and they are fundamental. Is the actual physical location where every machine running on the network is physically inside the Swiss borders, and where the legal ownership, where every node provider, the person or company running the machine is Swiss domiciled entity, and also the underlying jurisdiction where the protocol is cryptographically secured so that it can only be assessed or altered through Swiss judicial channels. Think of it like this, okay? Standard cloud storage is like renting a hotel room, okay? You have a key, yes, you can use a hotel room, but the hotel manager also has a key. The cleaning staff also has a key, and the police can demand the key from the hotel manager to open the door whenever they want. A sovereign subnet, for example, is like buying a plot of land and say building a vault on that land. You own the land, you own the actual underlying building, and you hold the only key to that vault. And say foreign authorities want in, they have to file a request through the Swiss court system, okay? And they cannot just bully the landlord because there is no landlord. There is only the protocol. And this here restores the digital neutrality that Switzerland is losing. It provides a way to use modern, scalable web speeds without submitting to actual foreign extraterrestrial overreach. Now, let's look at who is actually going to use this, okay? We can look at, say, the first pillar. Obviously, it would be the financial sector, obviously. You know, let's look at the Blockchain Act and say, and the legal environment conducive, say, to innovation. Okay. But let's sort of read between the lines here. Swiss banks are not interested, okay, in buying, say, random cryptocurrencies. They don't care about that. They are interested in settlement. Because I could tell you that in traditional finance, settlement is the boring, unsexy plumbing, okay, that moves money around, right? Say from bank A to bank B. And right now that system is dead slow, okay? Expensive and runs on legacy code from 60 years ago, from the 70s. I remember watching, for example, trade desks operate during high volatility events, and you could execute a trade in a millisecond, okay? But the actual money itself wouldn't settle for 2 days. That 2-day gap is called settlement risk. It's the risk that, for example, the other guy on the other side goes broke before the money arrives. And Swiss banks, trying to eliminate the underlying risk totally, they want instant settlement, but they cannot use a public permissionless blockchain because of banking secrecy laws. And they cannot splash their clients' transaction data, say, across a global ledger that anyone can read. You know what I mean? And a Swiss-only subnet solves this fully. It allows banks to run canisters, which are just, say, example, advanced smart contracts that actually process the sensitive client data. Fully sovereign, this data never leaves this Swiss jurisdiction. It never touches, for example, a US server, and it is processed instantly. This isn't speculative. This is core underlying infrastructure. It's an upgrade. It's the difference between, for example, sending a letter via a Pony Express and sending an encrypted email. You know, I mean, this is playing in the big leagues. The banks are likely already piling this privately. There's NDAs going on because it saves them billions in operational costs. Okay? We could also talk about another key pillar here, which is mentioned, and that's government agencies themselves. Because, you know, it explicitly mentions that federal and cantonal authorities requiring sovereign infrastructure for citizen data and e-government services. This is crucial. Say, for example, if you work in analysis, you will know this, that governments, okay, do not put things like this in writing unless conversations are already deep in progress. Okay? Governments, okay, they're risk averse in nature. They don't test things, they procure things. They are already proven, okay? The specific mention of e-government services, this points directly to electronic identity or EID. Imagine a digital passport. If you host a national digital ID system on Amazon Web Services or Azure, you are effectively giving a foreign corporation the metadata on your entire population. That is a national security risk and a nightmare to put it all together. Using a decentralized sovereign protocol like the world computer allows for an identity system where the actual user owns their data. It uses a different type of cryptography instead of a username and password stored on a server in the US. It uses underlying cryptographic proofs. And I can tell you from a structural perspective, this is the holy grail of government tech: high security, low liability, and complete sovereignty. And also another key pillar here is healthcare, which are overlooked. And the focus here in all this is the actual underlying operational continuity and data protection. We have all seen this before. The headlines about hospitals being held to hostage by ransomware, and how hackers say locks up the patient records and data and demands payment to release them. We've seen this all before. And this happens, okay? Because the underlying traditional databases, they have what we call a single point of failure, and they rely on your general passwords that can be stolen, easily hacked. The architecture we are discussing here doesn't work like that. Doesn't work in that way, because the smart contracts, the underlying software, the software containers don't have login credentials in the traditional sense. They are what we call tamper-proof by design. You cannot say inject malware into them, and the way you can say with a traditional server, this doesn't happen. This offers underlying immunity to the most common ransomware vectors. And for a hospital, okay, or anything important in the healthcare sector, this isn't about crypto. They don't care. It's about making sure the heart monitors don't shut off because someone clicked, say, a phishing link, and the Davos signal here and the underlying insider sentiment. There is massive commentary associated with this, data, talking about what's happening in Davos, talking about all the insights that's happening. For those who don't follow it, Davos, okay, is a World Economic Forum. It's called the WEF. It's, say, a gathering of global elite, put it that way. Deals are made at Davos. They are not made by developers, say, in hoodies, okay? They are made by heads of states, CEOs of multinationals, conglomerates. When insider commentary says, for example, the writing is on the wall, and say hints at news that cannot be disclosed yet, it's a signal, okay, that the soft disclosure phase is ending. Because in finance, okay, we often talk about asymmetric information. And this is when I say a small group of people, just like in Davos, they know something that, say, the wider market hasn't priced in yet, okay? The mention of a roadmap where even, okay, it only 50% goes through implies that the technology is built, okay? The legal framework is ready to go, but here, the phase we are entering now is migration, okay? This is critical because this is the moment when, say, a technology goes from being an experiment to being an actual underlying utility. It's like the moment the internet went from being a tool for academics to being the backbone of commerce itself, It happens slowly, okay, but then all at once, And let's look at a strategic forecast for the next 24 months. And based on this forensic analysis that I've actually given today, we can map out, a likely trajectory for the next 2 years or so. We will likely see a pilot announcement, phase. This, won't be the entire banking system switching, say, to to the network overnight. It will be something specific like a land registry or a municipal voting system. Canton, like Zug or Zurich, will likely announce they are moving, for example, a public registry to a sovereign subnet. This validates the technology, as government grade quality. And following that, we look for the banking bridge, A consortium of private banks will, likely launch a proprietary network from settling assets between, say, they will bypass the legacy SWIFT systems completely, for internal transfers within Switzerland, using the Swiss subnet to ensure compliance. And finally, too, the sovereign mandate here. Once a pilot works, legislation often follows. We see laws, requiring that certain categories of, say, sovereign data, we're looking at health records, tax data, must be hosted on infrastructure that is immune to foreign subpoenas. Okay, now let's look at the probability in all this. Let's do an assessment. When we weigh, say, the variables, like the probability of this adoption actually happening is statistically high. The technology works. It scales to web speeds, which is something most blockchains cannot do. Full stop. Okay. Now let's look at the legal framework. It's sound. The arguments say regarding jurisdiction is legally defensible. Okay. The political will is there because Switzerland is desperate. Okay, to maintain its underlying status as a digital safe haven. The only friction is bureaucracy. Governments, they move slowly. But the pressure from, obviously, the underlying Cloud Act and the increasing frequency of cyber attacks and global bifurcation that's happening with instability around the world with war accelerates the timeline. And the aha moment here is the key takeaway that changes how you view this underlying sector. Most people are looking at the charts, okay? They're always care about price action and wondering which token will go up next week or today. They are analyzing hype, they're degenerates. But the real money, the smart money, the institutional money is analyzing legal frameworks and underlying core infrastructure. They are looking for the rails that the future economy will run on, okay? If you actually understand this is not a marketing pitch for a token, you know what I mean? But an actual underlying legal defensive strategy for a nation state. The picture becomes absolute crystal clear. The transition from, say, blockchain to sovereign cloud is I'm telling you, the pivot point here in all this. It solves a real world problem that costs governments and banks billions and billions and billions of dollars in risk. And I could tell you my experience, you don't bet on the technology that has the best marketing. No, 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 no. You bet on the technology that solves the biggest headache for the most powerful people. And that's why they were at Davos. The headache is data sovereignty. The painkiller is this infrastructure. So ultimately, understanding this pivot from speculation to sovereign infrastructure can absolutely completely change how you approach the digital asset space. And the key lesson here is simple, okay, but powerful. Utility matters more than hype, okay? Because the projects that actually survive at the end of the day and thrive are the ones that integrate into the underlying fabric of the real world. The ones that help governments govern and banks bank. And this perspective might just shift the way you see the world. Instead of seeing, say, for example, a chaotic market of digital coins, you start to actually see the blueprint for a new digital architecture. Think about it this way next time, okay? Say you hear about data privacy or cloud security, okay? It could make all the difference in understanding where value will actually accrue in the coming decade. And that's the story behind the Swiss sovereign cloud. With that, okay, we wrap up today's journey into the underlying forensics of digital sovereignty because everything comes together, okay, when we see it from this angle, not as a gamble, but as an evolution of the underlying internet itself. And stay curious and let your journey continue because everything we've explored today, say from the shift from rented servers to sovereign soil, the move from speculation to national security, it could change the way you see the digital future forever because we are standing at the crossroads right now. One path leads to a world where we earn nothing and rent our privacy, and the other leads to a world where technology actually empowers sovereignty and protects what is ours. And remember here, the choices you make today and how you educate yourself, what you pay actually attention to, will actually shape tomorrow's story, because the writing's on the wall, but only for those who are actually willing to read it. And if this video cut actually through the noise and actually gave you clarity, not hype, not hopium, then do me 3 things right now. Okay? Hit like, so this reaches people who are tired of being misled. Subscribe, because this channel is all about understanding where technology, money, and power are actually going, before the headlines actually catch up to it all. And comment also below with what clicked for you, or what you want broken down, say, in future videos. I read every single comment, if it's of value, of course. And if you want, obviously, signal instead of noise perspective, instead of panic, and clarity before consensus, subscribe now. And remember to stay decentralized, and I will see you on the internet computer. Until next time.